Hi, everyone. This is Nina Collins here at the Wolfer, and we're here today as part of our Wolfer Expert series with Jennifer Jones Austin, who I amazingly have never met in New York. I feel like we know a lot of people in common, and I was recently introduced to her by a dear mutual friend, and Jennifer is so impressive and interesting, and I just knew right away that we had to interview her for the Wolfer community. So welcome, Jennifer.
Nina, I'm really delighted. I'm excited. I'm honored that you're giving me this opportunity to meet some of your community. So
yeah, no, you are like a dream Wolfer candidate. So I'm going to read a little bit of your bio because it's just, so basically for everyone who's listening, we're talking basically about social justice and civil rights. So Jennifer Jones Austin has devoted her career to fighting for equal opportunity for all, with a keen focus on dismantling systemic barriers for persons of color, women, and children. A fourth generation leader of faith and social justice, she's the CEO and executive director of FPWA, which is a huge anti-poverty policy and advocacy nonprofit with, I think, 170 member organizations. And their work is centered completely on economic opportunity and upward mobility. She's also a radio host, an author, a public speaker. She sits on the board of many organizations. The one I'm most interested in is she is currently board chair of New York City Department of Corrections, which I think is fascinating. She's also on the National Action Network. She does so many things. She guest hosts a nationally syndicated radio program called Keeping It Real with Reverend Al Sharpton. She does something every month, I think, with, what's her name, Karen Hunter, whose show I've been on. She's written one book and edited another. So anyway, welcome. We're very, very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I thought we would start. I think it would be really interesting for our listeners to hear a little bit about your family background and why you are who you are and do the work that you do.
Absolutely. So I was raised here in Brooklyn. I was raised, my mother and father raised me here we were just talking the Lefferts Manor community of Brooklyn, New York. And my father was a civil rights leader, a pastor, a social justice activist. His father was my grandfather, and Martin Luther King Sr. were roommates at Morehouse College.
Oh, wow.
My father and Martin Luther King Jr. co-founded the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which was a response to another large major Baptist organization that didn't want to get involved in civil rights. My father was the president of the New York chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and president of the New York chapter and then national body of Operation Breadbasket, which was the economic justice arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. My mother was an artist, still is an artist, and for many years did not work. And then when she ultimately first went to work, she did so by providing art therapy to individuals who have been involved with substances. And were, trying to work through. It was an art therapy modality that she engaged in. And then she went on to become the first curator and first African-American woman to curate a Fortune 500 national corporate art collection.
Wow, which one?
AT&T.
How cool, good for her.
She traveled the world buying and commissioning art to be hung in AT&T facilities across the country.
Okay, that sounds like such a fun job for an artist. Like you get all the corporate perks, but you get to really choose artists. It's great.
The ball and commission works. But here's the interesting thing. She was a Black woman and she grew up in the South and was told that arts was not really a place and space in which Black women should engage. She needed a more practical, career pursuit. My father had been involved in the work of social justice as a faith leader. And so I grew up in this household where, talking about what we had for dinner was very much, along the lines of talking about, the latest social justice issue. The conversations were so common. And I grew up with parents who pursued their passions, their life's calling. So when I was graduating from college, with a chemistry degree, but I determined I didn't want to go to med school. I didn't want to be a dentist, didn't want to be a chemist. I was like, what am I going to do? Began thinking about I needed to do something very much like my parents pursue, like my passion, because that's what I'd see.
That's what you were modeled, yeah.
It was modeled to me. My uncle, who was a civil rights attorney, said to me, go to law school, and while you're there, you'll figure it out. And so I was like, okay, what else to do? And he said to me, this was great. He said, And if you don't, that's okay, because people think that lawyers can do anything short of practicing medicine. He said, you're a teenager, you can go to med school, but you don't, so go to law school. And so I did. I went to law school, and in my second year of law school, while searching for a law review note topic, I happened upon a case of a young man who had been tried and convicted for the murder of his father. Mm. And the circumstances that the defense presented them were such that this young man had endured so many years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of his father that he thought that his life was always at risk, that he was in danger of being killed by his father. So, too long a story to get into the specific facts. But at sentencing, the judge overturned the verdict and said this man was suffering from post-traumatic stress because of the years of abuse. And all of a sudden, I realized there are children out there who are suffering every day at the hands of their parents. And, there are a multitude of reasons as to why. And all of a sudden, I discovered my calling. And I felt like I've been called to work to kind of bring forth the issues, the concerns of children who are neglected, abused, oppressed, minimized. And that was in 1991.
Wow.
And ever since then, I've been doing the work. And what has happened is I began to appreciate you can center on children, but unless you're also addressing the needs that attend their families, the concerns, poverty stressors, mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence.
All of it. Yeah.
Then you can't do anything for the kids because they have to live in these homes.
Right.
And for the last several years, that's what I've been doing.
It's amazing. So 1991, we must be roughly the same age. I'm 51. I graduated from Barnard in 1990. How old are you?
I am 52.
Nice. I like to say how old we are here.
And it's all good.
Your story is reminding me, we actually had an incredibly moving post in our community just yesterday that really kind of rocked everyone. We have a beloved member of our community who's a Black woman, a very successful Black woman in LA. And she posted something yesterday saying she had never shared this story before, but it was this incredibly powerful story about being 15 years old and being sexually molested by her stepfather. He wasn't actually her stepfather. He was her mother's boyfriend. And he was, I can share this because I'm not sharing her name, obviously, but he was married and her mother was his mistress and he was supporting them financially. All the characters in this particular story are Black. And he was a police officer and she was 15 and he molested her and she told her mother, and her mother said she didn't believe her. And this had been the defining traumatic moment of her life. And it was a powerful sharing in so many ways. It was beautifully written. Hundreds of women came forth with their own stories of similar stories, white women, Black women, everyone. So the reminder of how prevalent that kind of abuse is, but also a thing that struck me in what you were saying is, everyone was saying how horrible the man was, clearly, but how horrible it was that her mother couldn't protect her.
Oh, yes. And
I fully agree. But there was also this recognition of how complicated money and race played in the story. Yeah. So for this woman, she was being financially supported by this man. This was also, if we're in our 50s, this was 40 almost years ago. And the feelings the mother had about shedding light on a Black man who had become successful in the community and his bad behavior. Like, it's very layered and complicated.
It's so layered. It's so complicated. And that's exactly what I grew to appreciate. Yeah. That you can't just center on the child because the mother, the father, the other people involved are showing up with so many different issues. And I realized that in my work, I have to try to take this holistic view. It's not to excuse behavior.
Right.
But it's to understand behavior, because unless you get to the root cause of the problems, why could that mother not respond, right? We can beat her up and we can say, what a bad mother she is. But she was presenting with her own challenges.
Absolutely. And her own fear and her own particular situation. And it's really, so interesting. You talked about this case with this young man that got you started down this path. And now all these years later, you end up as chair of New York City Board of Corrections, which has to seem, I mean, that just sounds so kind of badass and awesome. How long have you been chair of that board?
I've been chair for just about a year. I've been on the board for about 4.5 years, but I began chairing about a year ago. And chairing came with this agreement with the city of New York's mayor, Bill de Blasio, that together we would end solitary confinement.
That was my next question, was let's talk about solitary confinement. That's great. So he brought you on saying, this is a priority, let's deal with this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what happens in New York City and across the nation is that very often detained persons, if they are in jail, they are detained because mainly they're waiting a trial, or prisoners, if they're at the prison level, or inmates. We try to distinguish between the two, because if you haven't yet been tried and convicted, you shouldn't be called a prisoner or an inmate.
I see. So you're detained or you're an inmate, to be clear. Because
exactly.
people often, in New York City, I've heard people often end up detained for as long as 2 years.
Oh, sometimes it can be longer, unfortunately, 4 or 5 years. And so you're detained awaiting trial. Well, what happens in New York City and in other places is if you engage in violence, egregious violence, slashing of someone, hurting people in other ways, you can be sent to solitary confinement. 23 hours in cell in a confined small setting, often just dark walls. And what happens?
You go crazy.
Out of your mind, right? No engagement with any other individual.
Right. And you haven't even been convicted of a crime. I mean, not that you should be there if you have been even, but that's just insane.
You haven't even been convicted. And then what we've also seen happen in New York City and elsewhere is that it has been used sometimes as a tool by the Department of Correction, the uniformed officers, when they don't like you, they want to exert power over you, they'll put you in solitary confinement. And what we've seen time and time again is just what you and I just talked about, Nina. People go out of their minds. Yeah. And it's almost intended sometimes, it seems to be by design. Let me put you here. You're recalcitrant. You're acting out. We need to break you. So let's put you in these places. And what we said here in New York City is no more. The advocacy community said no more. People on the board said no more. And the state of New York said, okay, we're going to do something about it. So fortunately, here at the state level, just recently legislation was passed and signed by Governor Cuomo just about a week and a half ago, saying that you cannot put somebody in solitary confinement for any longer than 15 days. But here in New York, we're saying no solitary confinement. Yeah. Now we're in the process of putting forth a model that ensures that people will not be put be put in these isolated cells, dark cells, for 23 hours. People will now be able to be out of their cells for 10 hours a day. Okay. In a setting where they can see and interact with other people. And so it almost becomes like their cell where they sleep becomes a place where they are resting. Great. But they will have this kind of like an anteroom, a separation, but they can engage with other people, and they can receive programming and other supports. That's great. So will this happen immediately? Is this effective very soon? So the challenge that we have there is that right now we're going to public comment where advocates and others get to weigh in and say, is this good enough? What more needs to be done? One of the issues that we're centering on is attorney representation to make sure that you have some counsel before you're even put in such a setting. And then they're going to have to build some of these jails. So it's probably going to be like a 6-month process before it's completely eradicated. The current system and this new system is put in place. And New York, sorry, this is a little bit in the weeds, but New York can do this even though New York State is saying there's a 15-day maximum. We can do it because what happens is between, and this is the lawyer in me in this moment, you cannot take away the rights that are granted to you by the next higher authority. So if the federal government said, 15 days, then New York City could do no more than 15 days. State says 15 days, we can do no more. We can still do our own thing. Got it. Well, so that will be a huge achievement. It's really sad. And it definitely seems to be a trend around the country, right? The eradication of solitary confinement. So here's the interesting thing. We will be the first city first urban large city to eradicate it completely. Around the country, as you've spoken to, they're doing it for young persons, they're doing it for women, but we will be the first city to say everybody cannot be inside.
It's so important. I have to say, I've long thought that I wished I was doing something with the prison. So I so admire that work. I mean, do you go to Rikers? You must. You're the board chair.
I was just there last Friday. I had not been there, in significant visits since COVID.
Yeah.
But I went last Friday, and I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I felt so strongly about ending solitary confinement is that when you tour our New York City jails, you see the impact of systemic racism.
Yeah, it must just be so devastating.
Especially Black and brown individuals, young men, and we just see how so many systems have been set up and then have failed.
Yeah.
Black and brown families.
Yeah.
Education. Our system that, for the most part, pays lower wages to uneducated and undereducated people that does not allow them to get ahead. In our city, 60% of crimes in our city, 60% of crimes are attributed to poverty. Yeah. 80% of crimes, 80% of the people who are incarcerated in our jails are poor. Begin to appreciate is that the way that our incarceration and penal system is set up, if you are poor and you become justice involved, then the poverty only deepens, and your families then fall deeper into poverty. So we've got to crack this nut.
How do you sleep at night? God, I mean, I have really realized this year with all the protests, and I'm getting better at it, but I realized how much I get so upset that I want to look the other way. So I'm really working on that myself. Like, I have a hard time watching certain movies,
can I just tell you, Nina, that's fair. That's legitimate, right? Because there's so much sometimes that we can hold, especially when we know that a lot of things are outside of our capacity, if you will. Like, I alone cannot change everything. You alone cannot change everything. For me, what I believe helps me is that one, feeling kind of called and purposed in this work is what helps me. Two, appreciating that I work more at the policy and legislative and advocacy level, so I don't see these issues on a day-to-day basis. Right. I know of them, but I don't see them. And frankly, I know that I'm not wired that way.
Right,
and I own that, right? So I try to do what I can from my own vantage point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You have to know what you can do. I think we talked about, I'm a longtime trustee of the Brooklyn Public Library, and it's so important to me, the work we do for children in the city. But I've found in the past when I've done volunteer work, it's, worked with young girls who I'm always interested in. It's always a matter of figuring out kind of boundaries and what you can do before wanting to rush in and fix everyone, because it really is painful. This
is what I say. So I told you that my father was a faith leader, I'm a fourth generation faith leader of faith. I tell people all the time, I'm like, you know what? God's not really asking us to do it all. She is just really asking us to do our part. Yeah. And that's how I feel about it. Now, the other reason why I feel so compelled and I'm able to keep going is, I had a big scare with cancer.
I was going to come to that. Yes, let's just tell our listeners, you wrote a book called Consider It Pure Joy, which I have not read yet, but it sounds like an incredible memoir where you all of a sudden, it seems, found out you had leukemia and really almost died.
I was in 9/11, and they say that there's a greater incidence of leukemia and other blood disorders for people who were down in ground zero on 9/11 and in the days after. I was 6 months. Wow. Mm-hmm. We've got lots to catch up on together. I was 6 months pregnant, and I was with my 3-year-old daughter. I worked in the area, and I was dropping her off at her daycare, which was just down the street, Trinity Daycare, down the street from the World Trade Center when the building fell. And about 8 years later, I woke up on a Friday morning with a flu-like fever. I thought that's just what it was. went to work, pressed through the day, kept popping Tylenol, came home later in the afternoon, popped in bed, just, kept on sweating and popping Tylenol. Literally was changing my PJs because I was just sweating through them. And then by that Saturday morning, after my husband had admonished me all throughout the night to go to the ER, I acquiesced and we went to the ER. One of the best hospitals in Brooklyn triaged me and said to me, looks like you've got a run-of-the-mill virus, just go home and sleep it off. Never took my blood, never did any blood work. Said, looks like a run-of-the-mill virus, sleep it off. That Monday morning, I woke up and I'm still was struggling, got back, went back to sleep, didn't get out of bed, took a nap, woke up a little later, and I could not see. I literally was blind. I could not see.
Oh my God.
When I knew this is not a virus.
This is not a virus.
Went to see my primary. She looked at me, she said, I can't do anything for you. You need to go via ambulance to the hospital. And literally about 48 hours later, after a series of tests, they came back and told me I had leukemia.
Oh my God. Where did they take you? Which hospital?
They took me to St. Vincent because that was the closest hospital to my primary physician. Fortunately, it was, for many years, it had been like a trauma hospital. So they went to work very quickly on me.
Yes.
By that Friday, I was in a coma.
Oh my God, Jennifer.
The doctors said that the cancer had moved into my lungs and it was shutting my lungs down. They intubated me, put me in a coma, and told my husband I was going to die that week.
Oh my God.
Fortunately, the doctors determined to give me chemo despite the prognosis, and the chemo worked. I was in a coma for 10 days, and when I came out, I was told that I would have succumbed, but the chemo worked, but the cancer was likely to return if I didn't have a bone marrow transplant. And that's when we learned that I needed a bone marrow transplant from someone with similar genetic type, someone the same race and ethnicity. And so what then ensued for the next 13 weeks was this mad dash, this amazing race, moving throughout the country to find me a donor, because we found that the registry, the bone marrow registry with 8 million people in it, did not have one match for me. We were looking for someone with similar genetic typing. And we launched this campaign across the nation and even beyond to find someone likely of African descent to be a match for me.
Oh my God, so there was no one in your own family who could do it?
No one in my own family, no one in the registry. And so the book is actually, it chronicles this journey to find a match for me to receive a transplant. And essentially what I go through is I talk about the experience of knowing that I'm likely going to die without this transplant, trying to find a needle in a haystack, having 2 young children, they were 7 and 12 at the time, them being engaged in this fight with me because, when I first learned that when my family first learned I might die, my husband brought them to the hospital to see their mother in a coma in a bed of ice with tubes stitched to my neck and my throat to say goodbye. So they were in this race with us. And it's this story about how community all across New York City and across this nation, people began learning about my journey and stepping up to support me. So it's a story about fighting for your life. It's about, not knowing whether you're going to live or die, how to engage with your family, the community coming together, and about having joy in the midst of it. Like seeing your life, like seeing your mortality, and rather than running from it, kind of leaning into it and trying to live as best I could, knowing that my life might soon end.
Yeah.
And all the joy that came from it.
It's amazing. Actually, tomorrow I'm interviewing a woman. So I did a master's in something called narrative medicine, and I'm very interested in kind of end of life stuff. And I'm interviewing a woman named Barbara Becker tomorrow, who's just written a book called Heartwood, which is about that very idea of living every day with death in mind. Your book sounds incredible. So consider it pure joy. I'm going to order it today. And what a story. So who was your donor in the end?
So I want to tell you, but at the same time, I'm like, it's in the book because
well, you don't tell me, but was it like someone are you still in touch with him or her? Like, where was this person?
So here's the cliffhanger. I began this work. I found this calling to work for children in need and children at risk. My donor came via that method, but it wasn't traditional method.
Wow, amazing.
And so for me, so let me just quickly tell you that what keeps me going is this sense of purpose and the fact that I had this near-death experience and I'm still here. And I'm here by means, I'll tell you what happened. I got a cord blood transplant using the stem cells taken from the umbilical cord blood of 2 babies born in New York City public hospitals. And as you know, the children who are usually born in public hospitals are born to mothers who don't have private health insurance.
Yeah.
So here I had, like just under 20 years before, essentially dedicated myself to working on behalf of vulnerable.
And here they're giving that.
Someone to give me, life-saving treatment.
It's unbelievable.
Of vulnerable kids.
It's an incredible story. It's incredible. Wow. I'm so moved by everything you do and who you are. My last question, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, you probably can't answer, but yesterday I was waiting online to get my second vaccine, and I waited for like 3 hours at a community center in the Bronx in the rain, and it was totally fine. It was like a good kind of New York City experience. Everyone was psyched, but I got bored, so I started canvassing a little for mayor, and it was really interesting to ask people who they're voting for and what they're thinking. And I did learn that a lot of people don't even follow this until probably May. They're kind of like, I'm not thinking about it. But so my question to you is, how do you feel about the mayoral race?
I think we've got some really interesting people in the race.
I'm Team Maya all the way. I love Maya.
Maya is wonderful. She's a dear friend of mine, and I think she would make a dynamic leader. We've got people like Eric Adams, who's been working for this city. And, he's in the race and he's a good person.
Yeah.
We've got Scott Stringer, who kind of knows his way around like city government. He's a good player. We've got Ray McGuire, who, has the business acumen. And the list goes on. Diane Morales, who, brings up the cause for
I like Diane.
Dejected Sean, Donovan, and the list goes on and on. Andrew Yang. What I'm most concerned about in this moment, and this is somebody who's worked in the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and in government. We need a leader who has vision, but also has management acumen. May not be a proven and effective manager, but knows what it takes to manage the system, because vision is important. But we've got a lot of problems that have to be solved.
Yeah, getting stuff done.
I haven't yet, declared it's this person or that person, and it's not because I don't think there are good people in the race, but I'm just looking at all of this, and for me, it's sometimes a little bit more challenging because I am so connected to government. Yeah,
you really know it. Yeah, no, it's very complicated for someone in your position. Fascinating. All right, well, I love talking to you. It's really great, and I look forward to meeting you in person one day, which I'm sure we will.
Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I'm inspired by all that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Create space for us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great. Women our age it's been an incredible experience for me. I know so many fabulous women. It's really enriched my life, and I love doing things like this, like interviewing women of interest. And we cover a lot of books, and we have a thriving community. And we're now planning our a Wolfer weekend in New York City in the fall, which we're really excited about. Last year we had to go virtual. So yeah, it's great. I love what we do.
Oh,
thank you a ton.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. I'll see you next time. I'll meet you, I'm sure, this fall. Okay. Bye, Jennifer.